Summer, 1944, Camp 30, Bowmanville, Ontario. Behind the layers of barbed wire and wooden guard towers of this Canadian prisoner of war camp, 612 German officers were about to experience something that would quietly dismantle everything they believed about the war, the world, and their own government. These men were scheduled for a journey just 60 miles south, a journey to Niagara Falls. According to everything they had been taught, such a place could not exist in the crumbling, defeated wasteland they believed North America had become. But before they could doubt their beliefs, they first had to believe they were living in a wasteland at all. Camp 30 covered 75 acres of flat Ontario farmland. Guard towers stood at regular intervals, rifles always visible. 2 rows of wire fencing surrounded the compound. Inside lived some of the most experienced and ideologically committed men in the German military. These were not ordinary enlisted soldiers. They were U-boat commanders who had stalked Allied shipping lanes across the Atlantic. Afrika Korps officers who had fought beside Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in North Africa. Luftwaffe pilots who had flown bombing missions over London and other British cities. Every man held the rank of officer. Every man had sworn personal loyalty to Adolf Hitler. And every one of them believed without hesitation that Germany was winning the war. Their certainty was not the result of ignorance or lack of intelligence. It was the result of propaganda working exactly as designed. For years, Nazi media had repeated the same message: North America was collapsing. German newspapers printed fabricated photographs of starving civilians. Radio broadcasts claimed Canadian cities had been bombed into ruins. Newsreels showed staged scenes of Allied defeats. Officers were warned that any information coming from enemy sources was designed to deceive and weaken morale. The prisoners at Camp 30 accepted these claims completely. By August 1944, the war had been raging for 5 years. 2 months earlier, Allied forces had landed in Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. American, British, and Canadian troops were pushing east through France. In the Soviet Union, Red Army formations were smashing German divisions and advancing rapidly toward Berlin. The Nazi war effort was collapsing on every front, but inside Camp 30, none of this felt real. When Canadian guards showed the prisoners newspapers describing liberated French cities, the officers laughed. When film footage of D-Day was screened, they dismissed it as staged Hollywood fiction. When Red Cross officials confirmed Germany was retreating, the prisoners smiled politely and shook their heads. Their government, they believed, would never lie to them. Canada, meanwhile, was strictly following the Geneva Convention. Prisoners received approximately 2,800 calories per day. They had access to doctors and dentists. They could write letters home. They received Red Cross packages. They played soccer and volleyball. They formed musical groups. They attended classes. They borrowed books from a camp library. Outside the camp, Canadian civilians lived under rationing. Fuel, sugar, butter, meat, and coffee were tightly controlled. Factories ran day and night producing tanks, aircraft, ships, ammunition, and uniforms. The entire nation was mobilized for war. The prisoners noticed the contrast but misunderstood it. They assumed Canada was wasting its last remaining resources to maintain appearances. The absence of bomb damage convinced them German submarines were still strangling North American supply lines. Everything they saw was forced to fit the story they already believed. Among them was one particularly influential figure, Captain Lieutenant Hans Weber, a decorated U-boat commander at 32 years old. He was intelligent, disciplined, and absolutely convinced of German superiority. His submarine had sunk 12 Allied merchant vessels. He had received medals personally approved by Hitler. When doubts surfaced among other prisoners, Weber crushed them. Evidence was dismissed without review. Questions were silenced. His confidence kept dozens of officers firmly anchored in belief. Then, in mid-August, something unusual began happening. Guards were reassigned. 2 civilian buses arrived from nearby Oshawa. Fuel permits rare during rationing were approved. Quiet rumors spread through the camp. On the morning of August 15th, guards entered Barracks 7 and read 20 names aloud. Weber's name was among them. No explanation was given. The men were ordered to be ready by 6 o'clock the next morning. That night, Weber lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Beyond the window, guard tower lights cut through the darkness. Somewhere beyond the fence lay a country he had been told was falling apart. Tomorrow he would find out what the Canadians truly intended. At exactly 7 o'clock, the selected prisoners stood outside the main gate. They were searched thoroughly. Each wore gray prison uniforms marked with white identification circles. 2 aging blue buses waited on the road beyond the fence. Armed guards boarded first. Only then were the prisoners allowed inside. The buses rolled south. Weber pressed his face to the window, determined to memorize everything. Instead of fear, confusion grew. The countryside looked wrong. Green fields stretched endlessly. Cows grazed peacefully. Farmers harvested wheat. Freshly painted barns stood beside neat homes. Children played in yards. They passed through Bowmanville. Shops were stocked. Restaurants were open. Cars were parked along the streets. Nothing looked bombed. Nothing looked desperate. This cannot be real, Weber thought. Roads were smooth and well-maintained. Trains hauled freight in the distance. Trucks carried industrial equipment. A billboard urged citizens to buy war bonds. After nearly 2 hours, the landscape changed. Buildings grew taller. Then came a sound, deep, constant, thunderous. The sky was clear, yet the sound grew louder. Signs appeared. Niagara Falls. Weber remembered reading that the falls had been destroyed by pollution, reduced to nothing. A lie, he had believed. The buses stopped near Table Rock. As Weber stepped down, mist touched his face. The roar shook his chest. Guards led the prisoners forward along a paved path. Then they rounded the corner, and the world broke open. A massive wall of white water curved before them, Horseshoe Falls, hundreds of feet wide. Water poured endlessly into the river below. Mist rose like smoke. A rainbow arched through the spray. The sound swallowed thought itself. Weber moved forward without realizing it. His uniform soaked through. He gripped the railing. "This is impossible," he whispered. He turned to a guard. "Where are the pumps?" The guard stared. "Sir, there are no pumps." Weber insisted it was a film set. Painted cliffs. Hidden machinery. Other prisoners agreed. They searched for seams, for lights, for speakers. The guards watched in disbelief. An hour passed. The water never slowed. Weber began calculating. The volume, the force, the fuel required. No machinery could sustain this. The crack inside him widened. Quietly, in German, he whispered, "My God, it is real." From a distance, Colonel Taylor observed. He wrote a note. The experiment was working. Over the following weeks, Colonel Taylor authorized more journeys. Small groups of 20 to 30 prisoners were escorted south to Niagara Falls under the same quiet procedures. By mid-October 1944, more than 200 German officers from Camp 30 had stood at the railing and faced the same overwhelming reality, and the effect was undeniable. Before the trips began, the re-education effort at Camp 30 had achieved nothing. Guards presented newspapers, official reports, film footage, and eyewitness testimony. Every single piece of evidence had been dismissed as enemy fabrication. Months of effort had produced zero change. After Niagara Falls, everything shifted. Out of 214 prisoners who visited the falls, 139 began questioning what they had been told. A 65% change triggered not by arguments but by experience. These men started reading Allied newspapers with genuine interest. They asked questions instead of mocking answers. The rigid certainty that had protected their beliefs finally cracked. Back at the camp, prisoners were allowed to write letters home. Canadian censors read every line. What they found was striking. One former Luftwaffe pilot wrote, "I have seen the most beautiful sight of my life, water falling endlessly, and a rainbow rising from it. Our leaders told us this land was ruined. They lied. If this was false, what else was?" A U-boat officer wrote to his wife, "Today I stood before Niagara Falls. I felt the mist. I heard the thunder. It is real. If they lied about this, perhaps they lied about the war itself." Not everyone accepted the truth. Hardline loyalists reacted with anger. At night, secret meetings formed in the barracks. Those who expressed doubts were accused of betrayal. Some men were pressured into silence just to survive the social tension. But the damage was already done. The story of Niagara Falls spread through the camp and then to other camps across Ontario. Prisoners requested transfers, hoping for a chance to see the waterfall themselves. Hans Weber changed profoundly. He stopped lecturing others. He read every newspaper. He asked detailed questions about production, supply chains, and frontline movements. Late at night, he lay awake thinking about how easily certainty could be built and how fragile it truly was. On May 7, 1945, loudspeakers crackled across Camp 30. Germany had surrendered. Some prisoners cried. Some sat in silence. A few still denied it. But most understood. The war was over. The lies were finished. Before being repatriated, prisoners were allowed to write letters to Canadian officials. Decades later, historians found the same message repeated again and again. Gratitude, respect, and Niagara Falls. One former U-boat commander wrote, "The day you took us to the waterfall was the day my blindness ended." Another bomber pilot wrote, "You showed us truth without cruelty. That kindness changed my life." When Weber returned to Germany in the summer of 1945, he finally saw the reality he had refused to accept. Hamburg lay in ruins. Buildings were shattered. Infrastructure destroyed. Families lived in cellars. Children begged for food. The lies had collapsed completely. He reunited with his wife and daughters. He told them about Canada, about the farms, the towns, the guards, and the waterfall. Years later, many former prisoners returned to Canada not as captives, but as immigrants. By 1960, hundreds had made Canada their permanent home. Weber was among them. He arrived in Toronto in 1953, opened a small bookstore, and became a citizen in 1957. He lived quietly for decades. In 1987, a reporter asked him about the moment everything changed. Weber smiled gently and said, "They showed us a waterfall, and with it, they washed the lies away." History later confirmed what Canada had discovered: treat prisoners with humanity, show them truth, and reality will do the rest. Sometimes the strongest weapon against propaganda is not force, not arguments, but a waterfall that refuses to stop flowing. The end.